Planned, unscripted discussion about what? About planning. Here we are. Got a question in our Discord Get Help channel, which is awesome. Like, there are a few things I love more than folks coming in and saying, like, hey, I got this question. What do you think? And it was about longer term planning, and I get asked that a lot. And unfortunately, I haven't really documented my answer very well. There's some old blog posts and things like that that I think have since been gobbled up by the internet. But here, I want to make sure that we talk about longer term planning and an approach I take to it, how that can factor in to your success. And it's a little bit non traditional, but I found it works for the teams that I coach. So we'll talk through that. Specifically, FF 4601, since this was your question, give me a heads up in the chat, in the Twitch chat, that you're here, so that way I don't start talking without you, since this is, hey. Hello. I was trying to figure out what I looked up the hex code for that, and I thought maybe it had some like fancy color name or something. And so that was what I was going to refer to you as, but it didn't seem to have an official name. So I look forward to hearing that story sometime. Okay, let's talk about planning. Most companies do the two ends of the spectrum pretty well. They have a sprint backlog and they have a year-long roadmap of sorts, usually in varying conditions of usability. Where I find most companies struggle is trying to translate from those big ideas that are out there in the annual roadmap into the actual sprints. Oftentimes, those larger items aren't defined very well. Unfortunately, they show up in your purview as a team later than you would like. So it's often a scramble to try and figure out, holy cow, what are we going to do about this? What is it exactly? How's it going to work? How are we going to build it? All of those things. So I borrow from Safe in their big room planning. I'm not sure if it has a new name in whatever version Safe is now. But when I learned Safe, gosh, when did I learn it? 7-8 years ago. They had the concept of a quarterly planning or big room planning, where once a quarter, everybody would get in a room, product would present, hey, these are the things we want to go tackle in the next year. The teams would then work through that, come back with a plan of this is what we expect to do in the next quarter. Sure, great. That was a 2-day event. The concept of a 2-day long meeting every quarter just gave me the willies, and I was horribly uncomfortable with it. But I did like the concept of having a view of where you're going and giving the team an opportunity to pull things off of that annual roadmap view where they're big and chunky and start talking about them when they're about a quarter away. So 6-ish sprints from now. So the way that I accomplish that is we've called it PI planning, PSI planning. Again, we borrowed all of that from Safe, but it's just we have a rolling quarterly forecast of what we expect to be able to do in those next 6 sprints. We do that once a month. Because, again, the concept of a 2-day long meeting just didn't sit well with me, and I'm not sure who would actually look forward to that. I'm sure there are people that are out there that like that, but I'm not one of them. So we just decided to update it along the way instead of having a big waterfall type planning for the next quarter, because that's really how I viewed it, of like, hey, we're doing waterfall, but in quarter size chunks. So every month we ask all of the squads to get together and reforecast the next 6 sprints. And because you're doing that once a month, you're bringing in 2 new sprints that you're adding towards the end, and that's usually items coming off of the roadmap, and then you're refining the things that are 1 through 4 sprints from now. So that gives the team opportunities over 6 months to look at something multiple times and get it to the point that by the time it's in that last quarterly update, they've seen it 3 or 4 times. They've talked about it and they know how they're going to do it. It's just it's got to make it into the flow of our sprints. So, okay, I'm going to hit the pause button. I talked about that really quick. This is all trying to help Mr. Miller here. So he's got a lot of stuff in chat. I want to read it and make sure I'm actually answering his question as opposed to answering what I think his question was. So bear with me while I read this. Oh, well, it's always good to be formal, Mr. Miller. See, now I feel obligated to say Mr. Miller just to be silly. Okay. Yes. So Sean, aka Mr. Miller, to everyone out there, you're bringing in the Matrix with Mr. Anderson. Sean's in a spot where there's planning in a vacuum. That planning in a vacuum seldom works. I can't think of a time when planning done by people not doing the work is accurate, unless it's accurate by like beatings of I said this was going to take a month, so it's going to take a month. You're going to work however long it takes to get it done in a month. That's the only time I've ever seen that work. So I just don't see that as a successful way to plan. It might make leaders feel better. And the problem is it then leads to a perception of, oh, the team's not good enough because they didn't deliver on what I thought they should. And oftentimes those folks really don't know what they're talking about. The other problem is reality hits. The reality of what it takes to build something comes to the forefront here. And is your company, is your leadership ready to accept that? There's a lot of folks, a lot of companies, the first time they do this planning, where the teams doing that planning and that forecasting are terrified. They are terrified that they've just committed to like a blood oath and thou shalt deliver all these 6 sprints perfectly, or else you have failed. That's why I like to update it once a month. Also, an approach that I take in talking with everybody across the board is I have the concept of the fog. So if you and I are standing in a foggy road, we're only going to be able to know about the things that are so deep within the fog because the denseness then just means we can't see. But as we step forward, as we start walking down that road, it's our responsibility to keep looking forward and see what's out there in the fog as we move into it so that we understand, do we need to dive out of the way because there's a semi coming, or are we good to keep going down that path? So I spend a lot of time educating the company about the fog and things that are deep in the fog. We know the reality of us getting it really right is really difficult. We might be able to see that yes, there's something out there and we know it's out there, but we're not going to be able to truly define it until we move forward in time and have the opportunity to step forward and get closer to it. So those are things that you're going to have to work with the leadership of your company on to get them comfortable with just the reality of like physics. You can't know everything. and you're gonna have to work with the team to get comfortable with it. I've had CEOs sign pieces of papers after the first planning that said, "This is not a blood oath," just to, like, get the teams comfortable that, okay, the company understands that we did our best and we can't possibly know everything, especially about things we just talked about for the first time ever. So I'm gonna work on finding a visual that will help us work through this. So bear with me a little bit as I find things on my local PC. We all know it's less organized than you would prefer. At least I tell myself. All right, here we go. All right, I want to show you this in real life and how it worked for us. Relax over there, River. Okay, here we go. I got to juggle the things and start. Yeah, that anytime I have really strong discussions with anybody that like brings up an email or brings back a screenshot or a photo they took of our boards that said something was going to get done and the on this date, like there was one person I worked with in particular that it was her pleasure, it was her joy to like catch somebody and to say, well, on this date you said this was going to be done by this date. So I have really direct discussions with folks like that. And the way I approach that is, listen, what we're trying to do here is give visibility, as much visibility as possible, to the rest of the organization about what's coming out of our team. I need you to honor and respect that it's not going to be perfect, but we're going to give you continuous updates so that you have the latest information over time. But if you prove that you're unable to operate like that, then you won't get the visibility. I won't share the transparency with it because it's clear I can't trust you with it. So you have to make sure they understand there's a responsibility on their end with the information that they are being shared to use it properly, to not weaponize it. That's really where things get into trouble is when someone tries to weaponize information that a team worked their butts off to try and get as right as possible. So that's the approach I take towards that. All right, I'm going to share. Okay, let me flip over and make sure. Yep, it's making it out. All right. So this is a view and it's backwards. This is frustrating because it's the only image I have of us doing it in the physical world and it goes from right to left. So um, bear with me. On the right side, this is our annual forecast broken down by quarter. Each row is a quarter, each column is a team. So we forecast out what we think the teams are going to be able to do for about the next 4 quarters. Now you'll see that there are some teams that have a more well-defined list of items going out a full 4 quarters. What makes those teams different? Are those teams better? No. They were just the first team. So they've had an opportunity to do this more and talk about the future more. So that's just the difference. The ones that have less items, they're just younger. and they haven't had a chance to build out that roadmap over time and have that full clarity and confidence to start saying, okay, 4 quarters from now, we think this is about what we're going to do. They just don't have the history. So as items move up to the top of this board on the right, let me make sure I'm seeing any questions so I don't just jump through that. Okay, cool. Sorry, I got to jump back and forth to make sure I'm paying attention to questions, but also navigating this all well. Okay, so as items bubble up on this board over here and they get to, okay, it's in the next quarter, they move from this board to the large board in the middle, which to confuse things even more, now the rows are teams and the columns are sprints. So an item will show up here at the top of the annual backlog, pop into the next monthly planning session for the next 6 sprints, and it'll start to show up here. So that gives the team plenty of time. If we're doing this every month, we'll see it once, twice, 3 times. So they'll have 3 opportunities to refine items that are coming at them. As you'll notice, just like the fog, on this board, the items that are on the left, meaning they're closest to actually being worked on, there's a lot more stickies. That's because we've refined it. So deeper in the fog, we have 1 or 2 stickies, maybe even none. So that's deep in the fog. And we don't get worried about it having 1 or 2 stickies. That's perfectly fine. We just learned about it. We just started talking about it. We just started to understand how we break it down. But as you move left in this, which is closer to actually being worked on, you'll see many of the columns have more stickies in them because they've been refined. So the team has clarity on these are the things that we need to do. And the sticky colors do mean different things, but I won't try and tackle that right now. Then, as items move towards now in our quarterly sprint view board, they just show up in planning, and planning becomes like a non-issue because we know all the things about it. We've refined it. Not only have we refined it in this manner as we start to bring in new work, we also have our normal refinements that our teams were always set with a goal of having 2 or 3 sprints fully refined out in the future. So that enabled us to just grab items. Planning for many teams became, let's grab these stickies out of the next board and let's drop them in a plan. So it became that simple. So it does require effort up front, but it does pay off in the long run in that planning really does get simple. Your confidence in what you're planning also goes way up. So that's the approach that I've taken over time to give us the opportunity to continually refine the work that we're going to do, ending in a place where we're all pretty darn confident in what we can do and how we're going to tackle those things. And it gives us more confidence as we start to look out in the future because we can see and understand the flow of how the work's coming in. And we just kind of know what we're doing, which is nice. And the more you know about the future, the more effectively the team can plan. So, Mr. Miller, that's my 20-minute ramble on planning. Fire away with any questions you have, or if you don't, we can, and they come up later, we can definitely keep the conversation going in Discord. But I do want to highlight for everyone in our Discord channel, there's there's a channel called Get Help where you come in, you ask questions, people respond. I don't know why you wouldn't use that free resource. Anything else? Any other gotchas or anything I can think of? You're going to have a hurdle the first time you do it. Teams will get nervous. You're going to have to work to get them comfortable with that. The good thing is you do it every month, so they quickly see how that information is used and it's not weaponized. So then they get more and more comfortable. But those first couple, you are going to have to do some real serious coaching, both with the team and the consumers of the info to make sure it's all being used properly. That definitely was a hurdle for us. What other hurdles along the way? That annual view, we also updated once a month. And we didn't do it with the whole team because stuff would show up, die off as we learn more. So the volatility of that board was higher. So it ended up being engineering and product leadership talking through that and actually sizing those items. Now we left them big and chunky. So the sizing approach that we took was large was a whole quarter, medium was a half a quarter, and small was a quarter of a quarter. So that forced us into very bulky packaging of quarters and understanding what was realistic to expect. And also, it gave engineering leadership time to fully understand items from the product team and make sure we had clarity on what was being asked of us. And we could push and ask questions and get to a point of clarity to where we were ready to size it. And that really helped everybody along the way. It helped product understand that, whoa, okay, so if we cut this thing that we thought was cool, but maybe isn't that important, we're going to save like 4 weeks. Yeah, we'll do that. So that was a great conversation for us every month to just work through that and really refine and make sure that we were working on the most important and impactful items as soon as possible. So that was a key thing for us. So also make sure that you're refining your annual roadmap once a month also. For leaders that ask for concrete frameworks or tools, what have you recommended? I recommend my approach. The problem is it's my approach. So it's not, I can't give them a book to go and figure this out. That's why I'm working to see how I can document this to give people away. But even then, there is no concrete framework. The safe sells itself as that, and leaders and executives like that comfort of, oh, so if I pay for this, everything's easy. There is no such thing. There is no silver bullet towards doing this. Um, so yeah, that's a difficult thing, and you have to have a tough conversation with leaders, and hopefully you're in a position where you can have that frank discussion with them. Or if you need me to back you up, I'll do it. Whether they listen to me or not, that's a different thing. I do know how leaders think, and so that's where when I was implementing this, one of the skills I hadn't built well enough yet was coaching and leading upwards. So halfway through this implementation of this process, I realized I have to get better at that. I just have to be better at it. So I force myself to work on that, put myself in the uncomfortable situations and just get as many repetitions as I could at trying to coach up and, stumbling and put my foot in my mouth and all of that stuff. Um, that was the only way that I was able to tackle that and get to a point where I could more effectively do that. Now, there's times where you can do that, but people don't want to listen, um, and that's an uncomfortable sign. Yeah, so we were 70-ish engineers across the board, and what that enabled us to do to just have an awareness of where we think we're going to go over the next year allowed us to make better architectural decisions. We could decide we don't really need to invest this much in building out this service because we've talked to product. We know this is a one-off. It's not really going to be used that much. In fact, we're trying to phase our customers out of it, but it's a legacy thing we have to support. So let's not overinvest here. So it allowed us to right size the architecture decisions that we were making and understand would it made sense to gold plate a thing and make it as resilient as possible versus we don't need to do all that. So that was the value. The other value was um, our engineers acquired a greater understanding of how our products help people make their lives better. Having that connection, what I call a commercial mindedness, allows you to make better decisions of the millions of micro decisions that are made every day by a team as they're building something. The more they understand the customers and how they're using it, the more effective they're going to be at building things more appropriate for our customers. And that can't happen if you're always on your heels reacting to these items that you just found out about that you've got to build in some unnecessarily small number of sprints or days. You're always on your heels. You're not able to think forward and plan appropriately. Yeah, and again, that's where the awareness doesn't equal a definitive plan. That's where I leaned really heavy into the fog, and that just became a thing where even in refinement sessions or some of these quarterly planning sessions, a team would get wrapped around the axle, and I would just ask, like, how deep in the fog is that? And if it was pretty deep in the fog, then the team would say, "Oh, okay, we're not going to worry about that right now. We're just going to accept it's going to be big and blobby, and we're still unsure about it. But like, let's not get too fired up about it now. Like, this is good enough for us to know in general what it is." So that was a very useful tool for us, for the teams to ensure they were giving items appropriate focus based on how deep in the fog it was. Because if you're focused on that stuff that's a half mile in that fog, you might be looking and worrying about that and get blindsided by a motorcycle because you're not paying attention to what's happening now. So having that reference point of where in the fog we need to focus and how much we want to focus at the appropriate depth for items that are in the fog was important. Yep. It's annoying. It is all about balance. That's why there is no silver bullet that can be defined. It it really is. There's a ton of variables that go into making the right call. So Sean, that's my what do we that's my 30-minute overview of how I approach planning whenever I am asked to implement a system. It is a little bit different, but a lot similar to some other things that are out there. So you can give comfort to some of those leaders that are looking for that silver bullet and say, "Hey, we borrowed this from Safe," and then maybe like, "Oh, well, that gives me the warm and fuzzies." So depending on who your leadership is, there's ways you can play it to get them comfortable. So, all right. Well, I hope this gives you whatever ammo you need going forward, Mr. Miller, aka Sean, and for anybody else that is going to watch and listen to this, same as well. Use wisely. Don't blindly copy what I've laid out here. You can use it as a reference point, but make sure you apply it appropriately for you and your company, because there is no silver bullet, even this approach. All right, everybody. Take care, plan wisely, plan carefully. We'll see everybody.